The car slowed, and then it did not stop. Nora heard the whole thing without seeing any of it, which is a skill nobody wants to be good at. She heard the tires ease off the asphalt as the driver coasted toward the curb, the little hesitation of a car checking an address. She heard the window hum down 2 inches. She heard the pause, the specific quality of a pause that means a person is looking at something they have decided they do not like. And then she heard the window go back up, and the engine take the car away down 17th Street. And her phone, in its calm mechanical voice, told her that her ride had been canceled. Juno leaned into her leg, warm and solid, the way she always did when she felt Nora go still. Juno was a yellow Labrador, 4 years old, 65 pounds of unbothered good sense in a leather harness, and she had done nothing wrong in her life except be a dog next to a woman who could not see. That was the 3rd time in 1 week. Nora stood on the sidewalk in the thin, bright Denver cold, one hand on the harness, and she did not cry, and she did not shout, because she had learned a long time ago that neither of those things moves a car that is already gone. Instead, she did the thing she had started doing on Tuesday. She lifted her phone, and she said, out loud and clear, "Note to self." And she recorded the time, and the driver's first name, and the make of the car, all of which the app had already read aloud into her ear before the man decided her dog was a problem. Her name was Nora. She was 34 years old, and she had not always lived in the dark. She wants people to know that, not for pity, but because it explains the particular way she is built. She could see, brilliantly, for the first 26 years of her life. She went to school for design, and she was good at it. Better than good. The kind of young designer who made older ones a little nervous. She could look at a page and feel when the spacing was wrong, the way some people feel a sour note in a song. And then, over about 4 years, a condition with a long name that ate the edges of her vision first, and then the center, took nearly all of it, until the world she had trained her whole life to see became a soft field of light and shadow and the ghost of shapes. And everything she loved, she now had to do another way. Here is what she refused to do. She refused to stop being a designer. People assumed she would have to, and she found their certainty almost funny, in the tired way that a thing can be funny and enraging at once. She learned the screen reader that turns a page of layout into a stream of spoken structure. Every heading and margin and hierarchy read into her ear faster than most people could follow. She learned to direct. She had a junior designer named Priya, whose eyes she borrowed and whose hands she trained. And between the two of them, Nora's taste and Priya's execution, they built brand systems and typography that clients paid good money for and never once guessed had been art directed by a woman who would never see the final proof. Nora kept the eye. She just lost the window it used to look through. And she had made, out of stubbornness and a very good dog, a life that worked. The very good dog was worth a word of her own, because you cannot understand what those drivers took from Nora if you think Juno was just a dog. Nora had waited almost 2 years to get her. Guide dogs are not bought off a shelf. They are raised by volunteer families and trained for months by professionals, and then matched to a person the way you'd match a key to a lock, temperament to temperament, pace to pace. And then the person goes and lives at the school for weeks to learn to become one working animal together. Nora had gone to that school a woman who still flinched at every intersection, and she had come home holding a harness attached to a calm yellow lab who had already decided that keeping Nora alive was the most interesting job in the world. What Juno did was not a trick, and it was not obedience exactly. It was a partnership so fluent it looked like one mind. Juno stopped at every curb and every stair and waited for the command. And she found doors and empty seats and the button at a crosswalk. But the thing that guide dogs do that stuns people, the thing Juno did that Nora will never be able to repay, is called intelligent disobedience, which means the dog is trained to refuse a command that would get her person hurt. Nora could say forward, and if a silent car was coming that Nora could not hear over the wind, Juno would plant her feet and not move, and take the correction, and be right. A month after Nora brought her home, on a gray morning at a corner Nora had crossed 100 times, Juno refused to go. Just sat down in the harness like a stone, and a heartbeat later, a delivery van that had run the light blew through the space where Nora's next step would have put her. Juno had chosen to be disobedient rather than let her walk into it. That is what those drivers waved off at the curb. That is what Trevor called an animal and a health thing, not a pet. A pair of eyes that had already, once, refused to let Nora die. So when someone turned Juno away, they were not inconveniencing Nora. They were reaching into the middle of her independence and pulling out the one piece that made all the rest of it possible, and telling her that the price of her dinner or her ride was to send away the reason she was safe on the street at all. People who have never needed a service animal cannot feel the size of that. Nora had stopped expecting them to. But she had also stopped accepting that their not feeling it was her problem to carry quietly. The life that worked depended on a few things, and one of the biggest was the simple ability to get from one place to another. Denver is a walkable city if you know it, and Nora knew her neighborhood the way you know the inside of your own mouth. Every curb cut and cracked square of sidewalk, every corner where the traffic signal chirped. But a city is bigger than a neighborhood, and there were client meetings across town and dinners in new places and a dentist on the other side of the highway. And for all of that, she used the same app everyone else used. The one where you tap a button and a stranger's car comes to take you where you're going. For 3 years, it had mostly just worked. And then, in one strange and clarifying week, it stopped working 3 times. And every single time, the reason was Juno. The first one, on Tuesday, she had almost talked herself out of being sure about. The car had accepted the ride, she'd heard it pull up, and then it had simply idled at the curb for a moment and driven off. And the app canceled. And she thought, well, maybe he got a closer fare. Maybe the address pinned wrong. Maybe it was nothing. She was generous like that. Or she had been. The second one, on Thursday, left less room. That driver had actually rolled the window down and said, "No dogs, sorry, company policy," which is a sentence with 2 lies packed into 5 words, and had pulled away before she could say the thing she knew to say, which was that Juno was not a dog in the way he meant, and there was no such policy, and in fact, the exact opposite was true. By Friday, standing on 17th Street, listening to the third car leave, Nora was not confused anymore. She was something colder and steadier than confused. She was paying attention. Because the thing those 3 drivers did not know, the thing the whole careless world tends not to know until it is standing in a pile of its own paperwork, was that the woman on the curb who could not see their faces knew the law that governed that curb better than they did. Nora had not gone looking to become an expert. Life had made her one, the way it makes all disabled people amateur lawyers, whether they want to be or not. Because when the world is built with steps in front of it, you learn very fast which rules are supposed to hold the door. She knew that a guide dog is not a pet. She knew that under federal law, a service animal is a piece of a person's independence, as much as a wheelchair or a white cane, and that turning away the dog is turning away the person, and that this is not a gray area, not a matter of opinion, not subject to a driver's comfort or a restaurant's decor. She knew it the way she knew her own address. And she knew one more thing, the thing that would turn out to matter most. She knew that being right is worth nothing at all if you cannot prove it, and that a blind woman's word about what a stranger said at a curb is exactly the kind of thing a comfortable world loves to wave away. So she did not rely on her word. She built a record. Every ride was logged in the app. The driver's name, and the car, and the license plate, and the minute of the cancellation. All of it read aloud to her, and all of it saved on a server she did not control and could not be accused of doctoring. She started a note on her phone, dictated in her steady alto. 1 entry per incident, plain as a grocery list. Tuesday, Thursday, Friday. She was not building a grievance, she was building a file. There is a difference, and the difference is the whole story. She told Priya about it on Monday, over the good coffee Priya always brought, and Priya got angry, the way sighted friends get angry on your behalf, hot and fast and wanting to call somebody and yell. Nora let her. Then she said the thing she had decided over the weekend, in the particular calm that had settled on her somewhere around the 3rd car. She said, "I'm not going to yell at anybody, Priya. Yelling is what they expect, and it's the one thing that lets them off the hook. Because then it's a story about an angry lady and her dog, instead of a story about the law. I'm going to do something much worse than yell. I'm going to document it. And then I'm going to file it, exactly the way the rules say to. And I'm going to make the rules do the work." And Priya, who had known her for 3 years, went quiet, because she had heard that tone before, and she knew what usually came after it. What came after it, that week, was the bistro. It was Steph's birthday, and Steph had picked the place. A new little farm-to-table spot called the Copperleaf that had opened in the fall to the kind of local buzz that fills a dining room with people who all read the same food blog. Steph was one of Nora's oldest friends, from before, from when they could still trade looks across a room, and she had made the reservation for 8 and texted Nora 3 times to make sure she was coming, because Steph worried, in her loving way, that Nora would find a reason to stay home. Nora was not going to stay home. She put on the green dress she knew looked good, because she had known it looked good back when she could see it, and she brushed Juno until the yellow coat gleamed under lights she would only feel as warmth. And she took a car, an uneventful one, a driver who said, "Nice dog," and talked about the weather. And she arrived at the Copperleaf on time and happy. She got about 4 steps inside the door. She knew the shape of the room by its sound, the clatter and murmur of a full restaurant, the warm wall of it, and she was reaching out with the part of her attention that finds the host's stand when a man's voice stopped her, close and firm and already unhappy. He said, "Ma'am, I'm sorry, we can't have the dog in here." Nora smiled, because the first time is always a misunderstanding, and she still, even then, gave people the first time. She said, "Of course, I understand the concern, but she's a service animal. She's a guide dog, and by law, she comes with me." And the voice, a young man's voice, a manager's voice pitched to be heard by the tables nearby, said the thing that turned Steph's birthday into a case file. He said, "I don't care what she is. We don't allow animals. It's a health thing. You'll have to leave her outside, or you can't come in." Nora stood very still in the doorway of the Copperleaf, with her friend's birthday going on somewhere behind that man's voice. And she felt the old heat come up her neck, the humiliation that never gets less sharp, no matter how many times you feel it. The particular burn of being made a problem in public, of hearing chairs turn and conversation dip as a roomful of strangers watched a manager tell a blind woman her dog was dirtier than their floor. And then, in the middle of the heat, she felt the cold thing settle over it, the calm that had been building in her all week, and she understood with total clarity that this man had just done, in front of witnesses, on the record, the exact thing the law was written to stop. She did not raise her voice. This is the part she is proudest of, and the part that made everything after it work. She took her phone out of her bag and she did the thing her state's law allowed, which was to record her own conversation, one party's consent being all that was needed where she lived. And she held it at her side and she said, calmly, for the record, "Would you tell me your name, and would you repeat that you're refusing entry to a guide dog?" And the manager, who did not know he was speaking into anything but his own certainty, said it again, louder, annoyed now, told her his name was Trevor and that he was the manager, and that the policy was the policy, and that she needed to take the animal and go. And Juno sat at Nora's knee through all of it, calm as a stone, doing her job, which was to keep her person safe, while her person quietly gathered the rope that this man was so eager to hand her. Steph found them at the door before it was over. Nora heard her friend's heels come fast across the floor, and heard the exact moment Steph understood what was happening. The intake of breath, and then Steph's voice going up and hot, telling Trevor he had no idea who he was talking to, that this was against the law, that she wanted to see the owner. And Nora reached out and found Steph's arm and squeezed it, because bless her, Steph was about to turn this into the wrong story, the loud story, the one that ends with two women getting escorted out and a manager feeling righteous. "Not tonight," Nora said, low, just to her. "I've got what I need. Let's not give him the fight he can win. Let's go somewhere that wants us, and I'll handle this the boring way. And the boring way is the way that actually works." So the whole table left. That was Steph's doing, and Nora has never forgotten it. 7 people put their napkins down and stood up from a fully set table at a restaurant they'd waited a month to try. And all of them walked out past Trevor into the cold. Because one of them had been turned away, and the rest of them decided that a table without all of them wasn't a table they wanted. They ended up 6 blocks away at an old diner that had been there 40 years. The kind of place with laminated menus and a waitress named Gloria who'd seen everything. And when Nora came in with Juno, Gloria just said, "Oh, what a good girl, right this way," and slid them into the big corner booth. They ate cheeseburgers and terrible, wonderful pie, and sang to Steph too loud. And Juno slept under the table on Nora's feet, and it was, Steph said later, the best birthday she'd had in years. The Copperleaf had done Nora a cruelty, and handed her a file. The diner had done her a kindness, and asked for nothing. Nora thought about the difference between those 2 rooms for a long time. Then she went home and got to work. And the work was the part nobody sees, the part that isn't dramatic at all, which is exactly why it wins. Nora built her case the way she built everything, the way a designer builds a brand system, with structure and patience and an almost inhuman attention to the small, consistent thing. She sat with her screen reader and she went back through the app, ride by ride, and she saved every record. The 3 cancellations, each with a date, a time to the minute, a driver's first name, the make and model of the car, and the license plate. All of it generated by the company itself and stored where no one could say a blind woman had made it up. She exported the trip histories. She took the audio from the Copperleaf, Trevor's own voice refusing her, saying his name, and she saved it in 3 places. She wrote down the 7 friends from the table and, one by one, texted them to ask if they'd be willing to say what they'd heard. Every one of them said yes. She did not do it in anger, and she wants that understood, because people always assume the fuel for a thing like this must be rage. It wasn't rage. Rage burns hot and burns out. What she felt was something slower and more durable, a kind of stubborn, clear-eyed refusal to be made small quietly. She thought about all the blind people who don't have a screen reader they've mastered, or a Steph who'll walk out of a restaurant with them, the ones who get turned away at a curb and just go home and don't go out again. And she thought, if I can turn one careless week into a rule that holds a little tighter for the next person, then the humiliation was at least an investment and not just a loss. That was the thought that carried her. Not getting even, getting it fixed. She knew exactly what it cost to do the other thing, the quiet going home thing, because she had done it once, early on, and it had nearly closed her whole life down. It was the first year of the dark, before Juno, when she was still using the white cane and still raw as a burn. She had gone into a coffee shop with a friend, and a barista had been impatient and unkind about the cane, had sighed and made a little scene about moving a chair, had said something under her breath that Nora heard perfectly because losing your sight sharpens everything else. And Nora had said nothing. She had drunk her coffee fast and gone home, and she had not gone back to that coffee shop. And then she had started not going to other places too, just in case, just to be safe from that particular small knife. And within a few months, her world had quietly shrunk to her apartment and the 2 blocks she trusted. She had let one unkind person redraw the borders of her life. It had taken her a year to win that ground back. She promised herself, somewhere in that year, that she would never again pay for someone else's ignorance with her own freedom. And so when the doubt came, and it did come, at 3 a.m, the week she was building the file, whispering the old whisper, maybe you're making too much of this. Maybe you're being difficult. Maybe you should just stay home more and avoid the trouble. Nora lay in the dark, with her hand on Juno's side, feeling the slow tide of the dog's breathing. And she recognized the whisper for exactly what it was. It was the same voice that had shrunk her world once already. It was the voice that wanted her small. And she had learned, at great cost, that the only answer to that voice is not to argue with it, but to get up in the morning and do the boring, unafraid, methodical thing anyway. So she did. She called a national advocacy group for the blind, the kind that runs a legal helpline for exactly this. And she talked to a soft-spoken man named Curtis, who had walked 1,000 people through this, and did not sound tired of it even a little. Curtis confirmed what she already knew, and taught her what she didn't. He told her that a guide dog handler turned away by a driver for hire, and turned away by a restaurant, had in fact been wronged twice under 2 overlapping laws. And that the way you make those laws move is not to sue first and not to shout, but to file, cleanly, in the right places, and let the machinery start to turn. He told her the restaurant fell under the part of the federal disability law that governs any place open to the public, and that her state had its own civil rights division that took these complaints and had real teeth. He told her the rideshare company had its own accessibility office and its own long, expensive history of being sued for exactly this, which meant they had every reason in the world to take a well-documented complaint very seriously. So she filed. She filed a complaint with the rideshare company's accessibility team, attaching the 3 trip records and a calm, dated summary. And she requested, in writing, confirmation of receipt, because a paper trail with no proof of delivery is half a paper trail. She filed a complaint against the Copperleaf with the Colorado Civil Rights Division, the state body that handles discrimination in public accommodations. And she attached the audio and the list of witnesses and the date and Trevor's own name, offered up so helpfully, into her phone. And because the rideshare drivers had violated federal law and not just company policy, she filed a complaint with the United States Department of Justice as well, in the plain online way the government actually lets you do it, a way most people never learn exists until the day they need it. There was a strange, steadying dignity in the act of filing itself, and Nora had not expected that. She had expected to feel angry, or vindicated, or at least relieved. Instead, she felt something more like the calm of a person balancing a ledger. Each complaint had a form, and each form had fields, and she filled them the way she'd fill any careful document, screen reader murmuring the labels into her ear. Her answers plain and dated and free of adjectives. She did not call anyone names. She did not describe how it felt. She wrote what happened, when, and who. And she attached the proof. And she saved the confirmation number each system spat back, a little string of digits that meant the government now had a record it could not pretend did not exist. Feelings evaporate. A confirmation number does not. She wrote each one down in her file next to the incident it belonged to, and she felt, for the first time all week, entirely solid. And she kept living, and because she kept living, the pattern kept growing, whether she wanted it to or not. 3 weeks into the waiting, a fourth driver refused her. On a Sunday, outside her own building, in almost the exact words the Thursday one had used. A year earlier, that would have ruined Nora's whole day. This time, she noticed with something close to grim amusement that her hands did not even shake. She simply lifted her phone, said the date and the time, let the app read her the driver's name and the plate, and added the entry to the file that was quietly becoming the most complete account of service animal refusal that anyone at either agency was likely to see that year. The careless world kept handing her rope. She kept coiling it neatly and setting it on the pile. And then, having done all of it correctly, and in writing, and with receipts, she waited. Which is the hardest part, and the part that separates the people who change things from the people who just vent. Nora was good at waiting. Blindness had made her good at it, at holding still inside an uncertain moment without filling it with panic. She went to work. She art-directed a rebrand for a regional credit union that Priya said turned out beautiful. She took cars, and most of them were fine. And the ones that weren't, she documented, because she understood now that she was not handling 3 incidents. She was establishing a pattern. And a pattern is a much heavier thing than an incident. Juno kept her safe. The file kept getting thicker, and one by one, the machinery began to turn. The rideshare company moved first, and fastest, because a company that has already paid out for this once does not want to explain to anyone why it paid out twice for the same thing. An accessibility specialist emailed her, and then called, and her tone was not the tone of a company brushing off a crank. It was the careful, slightly frightened tone of an organization that has read the trip logs and understood that everything the complainant said is corroborated by its own records. Because of course it was. Nora had never needed them to believe her. She had only needed them to check. The 3 drivers, the specialist told her, had been removed from the platform. Refusing a service animal was a violation of their agreement and of the law. The logs made the refusals plain, and they were gone. Beyond that, the company committed to a package of changes: additional driver education on service animals, a clearer in-app way for handlers to report a refusal in the moment, and a monetary settlement to Nora for what she'd been put through. She had not asked for the money. She had asked for it not to keep happening. They gave her both because the money was cheaper than the alternative, and they knew it. The state complaint against the Copperleaf took longer, the way government takes longer, but it took longer in the direction of getting worse for the restaurant, not better. The Colorado Civil Rights Division does not play. They notified the Copperleaf of the complaint, and somewhere in that beautiful, buzzy little farm-to-table dining room, the news landed on the actual owner, a woman named Paula, who had put her savings and her name into that place and had been out of town the night a manager she'd hired decided to enforce a policy that did not exist and was, in fact, a federal violation. Paula, it turned out, was not Trevor. Paula was horrified. Nora would learn later that Paula had listened to the recording once, in her office, and had to put her head down on the desk. Because there is no spinning your own manager's voice saying, "I don't care what she is," on a recording he did not know was being made. Paula asked, through the process, whether she could speak with Nora directly, and Nora, who believed in the boring way, but also believed in giving people a door, said yes. They met at the diner, actually, the one with Gloria and the pie, because Nora wanted Paula to sit in a room that had done it right. Paula did not make excuses. She said she had failed, that her staff had never been trained on service animals, because it had never once occurred to her that they'd need to be, which was itself the whole problem in a sentence. She said Trevor no longer worked for her, that the way he'd spoken to a customer, to anyone, was not something she could keep on a payroll, and that the recording had made that decision very simple. And then she asked Nora the only question that mattered, which was, "What do you want me to do so this never happens in my restaurant again?" What Nora wanted, it turned out, was small and permanent and worth more than any check. She wanted a sign. Not a big one, not a groveling one. She wanted a clear line on the door and on the menu that said service animals were welcome, so that the next blind person, or the next veteran with a dog, or the next diabetic whose dog could smell a crisis coming, would know before they ever reach for the handle that this was a place that had thought about them. She wanted every one of Paula's staff trained on the 2 questions the law actually allows and the many questions it doesn't. She wanted it in writing, and she wanted it to outlast Paula, baked into the way the Copperleaf ran, so that it held even after everyone who remembered this had moved on. Paula gave her all of it, and put it in the settlement so it couldn't quietly evaporate, and the state closed the complaint with an agreement on the record. Nora had walked into the Copperleaf as a problem to be removed. She had made herself, on paper, a permanent part of how it would treat everyone who came after. Here is what happened next, and it is the part Nora likes best, because it is the part where the whole thing stopped being about her. She had a file now, a real one, clean and complete, the 3 rideshare records and the state complaint and the federal filing and the settlement language. A paper map of exactly how one blind woman had taken a careless week and turned it into rules that held. And she thought about Curtis, the soft-spoken man on the helpline who had walked her through it. And she thought about how much of her own fear at the start had just been not knowing the steps, not knowing that the government lets you file, not knowing which office, not knowing that your own word plus a timestamp is a kind of power. And she thought, other people are standing where I stood on 17th Street, and most of them are just going home. So Nora started a hotline. Not a big operation, just a number and a quiet website that Priya helped her build to be usable by a screen reader from the first line of code, which most websites are not. A place a blind handler could call or write when a driver left them at the curb, or a manager blocked a door, and get walked, calmly, one step at a time, through exactly what Nora had learned. How to save the record, how to record your own conversation where the law allows it, which office takes the complaint, and how to file it, and what to say. Not legal advice, she was careful about that. Just the map. The boring, powerful map that nobody hands you until you've already been hurt enough to go looking for it. The first real call she remembers was a young man named Andre. He was 23, and he had been blind for a couple of years now. A suddenness, an illness that had taken his sight in a single terrible season. And he had finally been matched with his first guide dog, and was learning a whole new white world. And he admitted on the phone, barely leaving his apartment, because the one time he'd tried, a driver had refused his dog, and he had gone home and cried, and not tried again for 3 weeks. Nora listened to all of it. Then she told him the thing she most wished someone had told her on that first Tuesday, before the cold calm had to teach it to her the slow way. She said, "Andre, you did not do anything wrong, and you are not powerless. And I am going to give you a checklist, and the next time it happens, you are not going to feel small. You are going to feel busy, because you're going to be documenting, and documenting is the opposite of being helpless." He called her back a month later. His voice was different, she could hear it, steadier, standing up straighter somehow through the phone. A driver had refused him, he said, right there at his own curb with his dog in her harness. And Andre had not cried. He had done the checklist. He had saved the record, kept his voice level, thanked the driver for the license plate the app had so kindly provided, and gone back upstairs and filed the complaint exactly the way Nora had shown him. And he told her the thing that made Nora sit down on her kitchen floor with Juno's head in her lap and finally, quietly, cry the good kind of tears. He said, "I got an apology, and the driver got retrained. And Nora, the whole time I was doing it, I could hear your voice telling me I wasn't small. So now, I go out. I just go out now. Thank you for the map." That is the thing about the boring way, the documented way, the file a complaint and wait way, that isn't loud enough to feel like justice while you're doing it. It doesn't just fix your night. It becomes a thing you can hand to the next person, and the next. A map that gets passed hand to hand in the dark, until enough people are holding it that the doors themselves start, slowly, to change. The Copperleaf has a sign on its door now. The rideshare app has a better button, and 3 fewer drivers who thought a guide dog was a thing you leave outside. And somewhere in Denver, a young man named Andre goes out. Just goes out now, with a dog and a checklist and a voice in his head that isn't afraid. Nora still takes cars. Most of them are fine. She still hears, sometimes, that little hesitation at the curb, that pause with the decision inside it, and her stomach still drops the way anyone's would. But she is not the woman standing on 17th Street, listening to a car pull away, with nothing in her hands. She has the map now. She helped draw it. And when a door opens for her, as more of them do every year, she thinks about all the boring, patient, documented work that pried it open, and she walks through it with her good dog and her head up, into a room that, this time, was expecting her. If you made it to the end of Nora's story, I'd love to know what you think, because there's a real question underneath it. When something like this happens to us, most of us want to do what Steph wanted to do at that door. Get loud, get even, make a scene. But Nora chose the slow, boring, documented way instead, and it's the reason anything actually changed. So be honest, which one are you? The one who wants to yell in the moment? Or the one who'd go home and quietly build the file? Is there a time you wish you'd documented something instead of just getting angry about it? Tell me about it, and I always love knowing who's out there listening. Drop a comment and tell me what part of the country you're in and how old you are. And if you've got a good dog at your feet right now, tell me their name too, because Juno says hello. If Nora's story meant something to you, give it a like so it finds the next person who needs the map. And subscribe if you'd like to sit with me for another one. Be kind out there, and hold the door. You never know who's been turned away from it before.